Welcome to this year's Notre Dame Signing Day special. We're going to break down every single offensive signee that Notre Dame landed last week. We'll make sure to do the defensive version of this video sometime before the national championship if this gets enough likes and enough comments. So please reach out if you want to see the defensive version of this. But in the meantime, you guys let me know what you think about each player. I have a very broad, I follow all kind of college football. I have a very broad perspective. I really like hearing any college football teams, fans, perspective because you guys are a lot more laser focused on Notre Dame than I am. So I think you guys have a lot of valuable insight. Please reach out. Thanks for watching. We'll get started with the quarterback in this 26 class for Notre Dame. Noah Grubbs, 6'4", 205 from Lake Mary in Florida. If you're not familiar with Florida high school football, Lake Mary competes in the 7A classification. That is one of the highest levels of competition in the entire country. Noah Grubbs is a guy that was a 4-year starter at Lake Mary. Since he's taken over as starting quarterback, Lake Mary's been 43-12, and it's not over yet. They're actually pushing for a state championship against Vero Beach tomorrow. So if you're a Notre Dame fan, you want to kind of do some advanced scouting on the quarterback in this 26 class, grab a cold Guinness and watch the Vero Beach Lake Mary final because it's going to be a lot of fun. But talking about the kind of quarterback that Noah Grubbs is, this is a guy that originally committed to Notre Dame before his junior season, 6'4", 205. I think he's a really good athlete with that frame, college football quarterback frame. No doubt about that. He's going to keep adding weight to that 6'4" frame. I think that's right away what you like about Noah Grubbs. But him as a passer, I think the touch on a lot of these downfield throws is really impressive. We're going to take a look at this goal line fade here. Just the ball placement. Throwing with touch is one thing, having that ability to kind of take something off of these downfield throws, but another part of it's the timing and the anticipation. To me, with Noah Grubbs, watching the highlight tape, that's really what it is about. That's really why this guy's a highly rated quarterback, and that's why Notre Dame's taking him, in my opinion, is the touch that he throws with downfield, and it all starts with the timing and all that kind of stuff. So with CJ Carr already being that guy in that quarterback room, he was so impressive as a redshirt freshman in 2025. There's no need to field a rush Noah Grubbs ahead of schedule. I think this is the perfect guy. At the end of the day, CJ Carr's could have as many as 3 years of eligibility left at Notre Dame. I really think you just kind of stack talents in that quarterback room and just hoping that one of them develops into a good quarterback down the line. But I think there's a lot to be said about Noah Grubbs' starting experience. I know it's just high school football, but I'm telling you, 7A football in Florida is one of the highest levels of competition in the entire country. It's the closest that you'll get to college football at the high school ranks, in my opinion. And I do think that starting experience is going to really push Noah Grubbs ahead of schedule, and I'm really excited to see what he turns into. Moving on to the running backs that Notre Dame brought in this 2026 class, I think it was very important to bring in two premier talents in this position group because I think there's a very good chance both Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love are in the NFL next season. I'm a big fan of Anais Williams and Kendron Young, the two guys on roster right now, but I just think Notre Dame kind of needed an infusion of youth in this running back room, and that is exactly what they got. They went out and got quantity and quality with both Jonaz Walton and Javian Osborne that we'll talk about in a little bit, but we'll talk about Jonaz Walton right now. 5'10", 205 from Central in Carrollton, Georgia. The thing that really stuck out to me when I first watched his junior season after this offseason when he first committed to Notre Dame was the contact balance that this guy runs with. At 5'10", 205, really developed lower body. This guy just bounces off of tackles left and right. But I think something that I underrated the first time I watched him was the long speed. He went ahead and ran a 10.600 meter in the offseason between his junior and senior season. For a guy that's 5'10", 205, 10.6 is a very good number to be at. That's elite level for a running back. There's no doubt about that. And I kind of underrated that long speed into the second level when I first watched him. But what I always loved was the explosiveness. And that's going to play into the 5'10", 205. When he puts his foot in the ground, very much a downhill runner. He's just going to pick up those hard-earned yards first because of how strong he is, and then once he breaks arm tackles, you'll see him in the open field right now, how good that long speed is. This dude just has everything that you look for in a bell cow running back, and something I'm not sure if we'll see it on this highlight tape as well, but this dude really competes as a pass blocker. That's one of those things that you don't really see the field as a freshman if you don't do. I think a lot of people kind of underrate how important pass protection is as a running back, but if you want to see the field as a true freshman, you absolutely need to at least compete in that regard. And Jonaz Walton, that 5'10", 205, really big blocker, obviously. And just a guy that's not afraid to get his nose dirty. That shows up as a pass protector, but also we'll see that with the ball in his hands. Just a very nasty runner, very downhill runner, I think. What you look for athletically, what you look for physically, really has all of it. Really excited about Jonaz Walton. I'm very hesitant to say that Javian Osborne is the other running back that Notre Dame signed because I think that kind of downplays the caliber of football player that Javian Osborne is. So I'll just say that he's another running back that Notre Dame signed. I think Jonaz Walton's a great running back. I think Javian Osborne's in that same conversation, same caliber of football player. And obviously you just heard how high I am on Jonaz Walton. But talking about Javian Osborne, 5'10", 200 pounds from Forney in Texas. I think when Jonaz Walton is in the open field, his first instinct's to kind of get his foot in the ground, pick up that momentum into the second level and use that to kind of play into the contact balance that he runs with. Javian Osborne, he has that same level of explosiveness, but I think when he gets into the second level, his first instinct is to either juke somebody, string cuts together in the open field, or kind of redirect and find an angle into the end zone. I think he's really good at that. I really love the change of direction ability that Javian Osborne has, but I think Jonaz Walton and Javian Osborne are a lot more similar running backs than you might think at first, because I think both of their first instinct is to get downhill and just continually pick up those hard-earned yards. Both run with great contact balance. We'll see that with Javian Osborne. He's a bit more, see right there how physical of a running back he is. Before I said about how developed Jonaz Walton's lower body is, I think with Osborne, it's a bit more about him getting a low pad level and just running with that shoulder. And, when he puts his shoulder down, he does a really good job of just generating that power. And that's kind of how he runs with physicality. I think with Walton, it's just a bit more about him being such a good athlete into the second level and then that very big lower body up. But Osborne, really love the explosiveness, the change of direction. I said he's a bit more of an east-west running back, but I really don't think that's fair to say. I think he's, like I said before, his first instinct is just to get downhill. Both of these guys, both Jonaz Walton and Javian Osborne, I think they project as very high-level running backs at the next level. I mean, just take a look at the change of direction ability that Osborne has. I'm really excited about both of these guys, and I think year one, you'll really rely on both of these guys to kind of replace both Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Year one, they're not going to be as good as Price and Love are. I think that's one of the best running back duos that you'll ever see in the entire country, ever. Not just at Notre Dame. I'm just talking about, I'm not sure we'll ever see two running backs be as good at the same time as both Love and Price are, but I do think Osborne and Walton year one will really help replace them. Moving on to the pass catchers that Notre Dame signed last week, we're going to get started with Devin Fitzgerald. This is Larry Fitzgerald's son. It's kind of funny because last season we watched Elijah Burris, the guy that signed with Notre Dame. He was Plaxico Burris' son. And when we did that video about Elijah Burris, I said it just kind of looked like he grew up in a household with an NFL wide receiver. Just how smooth the routes were, all that kind of stuff, how smooth the release was. I'm going to say the same about Devin Fitzgerald, except we're going to be talking about it in a wide receiver that's 6'2". I think the movements, especially the release right here, take a look. There's no wasted movements coming out of his stance. There's no wasted movements when he's running routes. He's a very smooth athlete with the ball in his hands as well. Just no wasted movement at all. A lot of top receivers across the entire country. They're great athletes. They're great football players, but we just don't really see that smoothness as route runners from day one coming out of high school. Usually that's something we talk about them developing at the next level. I think with Devin Fitzgerald, there's just no wasted movement in the route running. It really, I hate to kind of use that trope again, but it really does look like he grew up in an NFL household. Another thing with Devin Fitzgerald, that 6'2", very big target. Really like the way that he uses every single inch of his wingspan because he's a big wide receiver. He does a really good job attacking the ball as well. The ball skills are great. None of these catches are happening at the body. Everything's very away from the body. When you do that, you're just making sure it's not hitting your chest. It's a lot easier to catch a ball off your hands than it is with your chest. You're going to bring in a lot more higher percentage of those. And also another point with Devin Fitzgerald that I meant to bring up before, I think there's a lot more nuance to route running than we might talk about to begin with. It's good to be fast in a straight line, but at the same time against zone coverage, sometimes you just kind of overrun your routes and you kind of run yourself into zone coverage. I think with Devin Fitzgerald, he's very clean out of his stance. He's very good at accelerating into those open spots, but when he hits those open spots, he does a really good job gearing down into the middle of zone coverage. That's not something you see very typically with high school wide receivers. So, very smart wide receiver in a guy that's 6'2", and a guy that's a really good athlete, by the way. I think we're going to kind of downplay the athleticism because of how much we're talking about the, more refined stuff of playing wide receiver. But, I mean, when you're Larry Fitzgerald's son, I'm really excited about Devin Fitzgerald. Look at him getting after it as a blocker as well. Love to see that. The next Irish signee that we're talking about is also coming from an NFL background. Caden Finley, the son of Jermichael Finley, a guy that played 5 years in the NFL for the Green Bay Packers. But talking about Caden Finley, 6'2", 200 from Aledo in Texas. I think at 6'2", 200, still a guy that's tall enough to play wide receiver for sure. I think at 6'2", 200, that's kind of leaning a bit closer to a running back frame, that natural low center of gravity. I get really excited about these kind of football players with the ball in their hands, and we'll see that with Caden Finley. He's a very physical route runner, but a very physical football player, as a ball carrier as well. But not only the physicality that he shows with the ball in his hands, we'll see that on this jet sweep here, but also the way that he can just kind of find lanes in the open field. I think he's really shifty. He does a really good job making people miss in the open field. I really like that trait from day one. I'm really excited to see that athleticism translate to him as a route runner, but I really love the physicality. We see that as a blocker as well, but especially with the ball in his hands, and I think we'll see that on this end around here, this jet sweep. The way he can just put his foot in the ground, get yards upfield, and then he has some shiftiness to add some yards. He's going to keep getting stronger, and I think we'll start seeing him run through a lot of tackles at the next level. When we just talked about Kane Finley, we talked a lot about his ability as a ball carrier, and it all started with him being 6 foot 200, the contact balance, the strength that he ran with. I really love Bubba Fraser's ability as a ball carrier as well, but it's a bit of a different conversation. We're going to talk a lot more about the twitchiness that Bubba Fraser has. I think this dude is a very explosive athlete. He ran a 10.5 400 meter time, which is a very good number to be at. We're going to see that translate as a ball carrier, the way that he can just kind of make people miss in the open field. But I really like this guy as a route runner as well. Probably a guy that's going to be at 5'9", probably a guy that's going to be limited to the slot position at the next level. I think this guy's just a weapon. You can line him up in the backfield. I wouldn't be surprised if, honestly, if the roster shakes out a certain type of way, that Bubba Fraser kind of plays a running back, wide receiver hybrid for Notre Dame. Maybe a guy in certain personnel packages, you can kind of line him up as a whatever, in the backfield as a running back. I think this is just a guy you kind of have to get the ball in his hands and just kind of let him do something in that regard. But yeah, really, really twitched up athlete, the change of direction ability, the explosiveness as well. Just a well-rounded athletic profile. The only thing is at 5'9", 180 pounds, I think you kind of have to get creative with the way that you use him at the next level. But really good receiver. We're just going to keep getting shorter here. Now we got Braden Robinson, 5'8", 160. When I talked about Bubba Fraser, I said he's 5'9", but he's actually 5'9 and a half. So a bit in that middle where you still feel good about the frame, or you feel good enough about the frame. With Braden Robinson, 5'8", 160 pounds, it's really going to limit him as a wide receiver. There's no doubt about that. But I think him as a weapon with the ball in his hands, again, at 5'8". 5'8's a good thing when you're a ball carrier, because it's really going to help him be elusive in the open field. And we said before with Kane Finley, he's real good using that strength and weight to kind of throw his weight around as a ball carrier. That's not the case with Braden Robinson, but this dude is just about as elusive a wide receiver as you'll find. As soon as he gets the ball in his hands, you can take a look at right here. He's hard to even get a hand on in the first place, and he really just has that explosiveness and that change of direction ability, and just the overall elusiveness as a ball carrier. That's what I really get excited about. This is kind of how I pictured it in my head. Just picture all the Notre Dame, the big offensive linemen on a screen, kind of getting out for a screen, and then you get Braden Robinson the ball. He's going to be a very hard guy to find in the open field because of that 5'8", and of course it's going to limit him as a wide receiver at the next level. But I really think this is a guy that if you're creative enough, you can find a way to use that next level elusiveness and that speed and that explosiveness to your advantage and really let him be a weapon at the next level. Dylan Faison is the last wide receiver that we're going to talk about today. He is also the #1 player in the entire country as a lacrosse prospect. His brother Jordan Faison is a great two-way player for Notre Dame, a guy that also plays receiver for Notre Dame. He's actually led Notre Dame in receiving yards in 2025. Really good lax player by all accounts as well. We don't really watch lax on here. I can't really talk about how those skills translate to the football field, like when we kind of talk about basketball or track. But talking about Dylan Faison, yeah, I always get so impressed by these guys that can do two sports at such a high level. I think it's one thing to be a really good and a really good college football wide receiver and then just contribute as a lax player. But apparently these two guys are very good at both things. So really excited to see what Dylan Faison turns into, because Jordan Faison's a hell of a wide receiver for Notre Dame. I really think kind of having his brother already doing both sports will really let Dylan Faison handle that workload at a high level, because that's such a difficult thing to do. I'm always going to be impressed by guys that compete collegiately at two sports at a high level. And yeah, having Jordan Faison, his brother, already doing that, I really do think that'll help Dylan Faison's long-term development in both sports. Ian Premer is the highest rated tight end in 2026 according to 24/7. And why have 5'8" Braden Robinson be your kick returner when 6'5", 220-pound Ian Premer got some kick returning experience as well? Look at him just bust through all these arm tackles. But talking about why this guy's such a highly rated tight end prospect, there's such a common theme with most tight end prospects across the entire country. If you watch like 80% of them, the 3 stars and the lower rated 4 stars, a lot of them will have that good length that you look for. It's just kind of about them, kind of turning them into athletes with that length, understanding how to move with 6'5", 220. And those top rated guys, those guys that are rated as the top tight ends in the country, they have that frame, they have that strength, they have that length. They already understand how to kind of move with it. That's the case with Ian Premer. Such a good athlete at 6'5", 220. Plus length. You see how long the arms are? We're going to see him as a ball carrier here playing in the running back, as a running back. Don't know if we see Notre Dame do that. Remember Tyler Warren at Penn State? They kind of used him in that capacity. I'm not so sure that there's enough room. We already talked about how good the running backs are at Notre Dame. I don't know if we're going to talk about Ian Premer being a running back at 6'5", 220. But yeah, massive pass catcher. That frame, I don't know if we'll see a lot of it on this highlight tape. You rarely do. The run blocking, that just usually does not show up on a highlight tape quite as much. That length at 220, he's a massive tight end. That's really going to help him kind of develop into a run blocker. So excited about that. Excited about his upside as a pass catcher as well. I mean, we're going to see a lot of it with the ball in his hands, but that athleticism will translate into him separating at the next level. Going to be a matchup nightmare. That's just kind of natural at 6'5", how big of a tight end he is. But take a look at the frame here. Real big wide receiver. Really excited about Ian Premer. He's a 5-star for a reason. He's actually the highest rated prospect that we'll talk about today, but really excited to see what Notre Dame does. They have a pretty good track record at developing tight ends, and I'm really excited about Ian Premer going forward. And of course, at Notre Dame, they're going to bring in more than one tight end. We'll look at Preston Frizzell right now, 6'4", 220 from Central Catholic in Toledo, Ohio. I know at 6'4", 220, we just said Premer was 6'5", 220. They kind of seem similar physically. I think Ian Premer is a lot more physically developed at this stage in his development. I think that's kind of why you see him so highly rated. But I got to tell you, Preston Frizzell, when I turned on the film, I was surprised how well this dude moves at 6'4", 220. I think that first route that we saw, he's got a really smooth release. We see him split out as a wide receiver at high school. I think this guy projects a bit more as an inline tight end as he continues to add weight and strength to his frame. But that experience as a receiver on the outside, I do really think it gives us some time to talk about the athleticism because this dude moves very well for 6'4", 220. Like I said before, I kind of prefaced Premer with saying that there's a lot of tall wide receivers or tall tight ends that get recruited that don't know how to move at 6'4", 6'5". I think Frizzell does a pretty good job of that, but I'm really excited to see how he develops as an inline blocker, as an inline tight end, and then kind of using that athleticism as he continues to grow. But I do think that, Premer was a 5-star, one of the best tight ends in the entire country, the best tight end in the entire country according to 24/7. That's a very high bar to kind of hold Frizzell too, but I think if we were just talking about Frizzell being the only tight end for Notre Dame, I do think this guy has some serious upside developing as a tight end going forward. Ben Nichols is the highest rated offensive lineman that Notre Dame signed, but at 6'6", 335, I think this guy should play wide receiver. Look at this hook and ladder here to the 6'6", 335-pound offensive lineman. I'm just kidding, of course, about the wide receiver thing, but I do think this guy's a guard at the next level. 6'6", 335, he'd be a great offensive tackle. I think we see how agile he is. We saw it on that end around before, but a bit more realistic, a bit more what we'll see at the next level. The way that he can kind of climb to the second level, I think at 335 pounds, it's pretty good. I just think you get more of him as a guard. And also at Notre Dame, they recruit and develop offensive linemen in general so well. I don't really think you should feel. I think you can play every offensive lineman at what you think they'll be best at. I don't really think you have to shuffle guys around just because you think you need an offensive tackle. Of course, Will Black from last 2025 cycle, really highly rated offensive tackle. I think with Ben Nichols, just how massive an offensive lineman he is, how strong he is as well, I think he's a bit better suited to stay at offensive guard. 6'6", he does move well enough. I think he would be serviceable as an offensive tackle if needed. But I really just think that strength, the way that he can kind of keep that low pad level and that lower body drive, I think he's a bit more suited for offensive guard. But yeah, really strong football player. I think you see that on this highlight tape here. Also like the experience playing offensive tackle. You kind of get a bit better offensive pass drops experience, I think, playing tackle because you got more room to kind of account for on your outside shoulder. I think that'll translate into him being a better pass dropper as an offensive guard at the next level. But yeah, just a real mauler in the run game. At that frame as well, 6'6", 335, there's less physical development that has to go on for him to see the field at the next level. That's kind of the common theme with offensive linemen. I say this all the time. I think quarterback's the hardest position to kind of grow into mentally. Offensive line's got to be the hardest to grow into physically, just how big defensive linemen are. Also, I say this all the time, but edge rushers, if you're a really good pass rusher as an edge rusher, you just can't hold up against the run at the next level. It's kind of easy to get you onto the field on third down situations. At offensive line, you really have to do everything. You can't just put a guy in that's good at pass pro just on pass passing downs as an offense, that's not really realistic. So I think he's very much ahead of the curve physically. From here, it's just kind of turning him into an offensive lineman, which, that's true about every offensive lineman. Yeah, Ben Nichols definitely a guard to me at the next level. The next guy we'll talk about, Grayson McHugh, 6'7", 275. I think this is a bit more what an offensive tackle looks like at the high school level. An offensive tackle with the traits to turn into a really good pass protector at the next level. So, yeah, 6'7", 275, LaSalle College in Pennsylvania. That's the same school that Joey O'Brien, the safety, goes to, that Notre Dame 26 commit. Really good player. We'll talk about him when we do the defensive version of this. But talking about Grayson McHugh, yes, 275. So with Ben Nichols, massive offensive lineman at the high school level, like I said, already so physically development, there's not as much strength and conditioning that has to go on, or there's not as much strength training and not as much nutrition program stuff that has to go on with the first guy that we watched with McHugh. A lot of weight, a lot of strength is going to be added to 6'7". I'll tell you that right now. He's a really long offensive tackle right now. He's going to get stronger and a lot more physically developed when we're actually going to talk about him contributing as an offensive lineman. But I think at the high school level, you can see how fluid of an athlete that he is. That's really going to help him as a pass protector, not only protecting that outside shoulder, but being able to kind of flash to the inside and, just be a really well-rounded offensive tackle as a pass protector. And I think one thing that he'll get better at is kind of keeping that low leverage. I think that's one thing that Ben Nichols did a really good job at for a guy that's 6'6", 330. He did a good job kind of staying low. McHugh, I think this guy's got a lot more physical development to go on, but all the traits turn into a really good offensive tackle at the next level. Given my final 2 cents on this Notre Dame offensive class in 2026, I think the player that's going to make the biggest impact day one, I'm going to go with two names, the two running backs, Javian Osborne, Jonaz Walton. Going to be so difficult to replace both Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love if that actually does happen. I think bringing in two premier talents at the running back position was so impressive or so important for Notre Dame. I think that's why you kind of saw them aggressively pursue these two guys really the whole start. They committed pretty early in the process. They ultimately end up signing with Notre Dame. I think year one, they're going to be two, I'm not going to say difference makers year one, but I think that their value is going to be very important year one because you're going to be replacing probably both Price and Jeremiah Love. Longest term upside, I'll probably just cheat and go with the 5-star Ian Premer. That's kind of the easy choice, but I think the way that he moves at the frame that he has, 6'5", 220, such an easy evaluation, and then I really do trust Notre Dame to kind of develop him around that skill set. I think he'll be a big name from day one. I just don't know if we'll talk about him contributing quite as much as the two running backs, but I think long term, I do think the talent that he has, especially if he starts adding that strength and that weight to that frame, it's going to be kind of be a very tough guy to guard in college football. And the diamond in the rough that I'll choose, so a guy that's kind of underrated that I think is going to overplay his 24/7 rating or his on-3 rating or whatever, I'm going to go with Dylan Faison. Jordan Faison's such an effective wide receiver for Notre Dame and also a guy that plays across, obviously. He was a 0-star coming out of high school, so I think that I'll go with the brother of Jordan Faison, Dylan Faison, to turn himself into a good wide receiver. You know, I kind of joked before, he is the number one player in the country, just not at the sport that we're talking about today, but yeah, I'll go with Dylan Faison for my underrated player in this 26 offensive class for Notre Dame.